Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Atlassian Enterprise Governance webinar. My name is Steve Terrelmus. I am the head of engagement and delivery for North America for Valiantis.
I'm Bonnie Beyer. I'm one of the delivery managers, primarily in Agile at scale and governance activities.
Hi, my name is Jenny Holderness. I'm a product owner for Aegon.
All right, well, you all are in for a treat this afternoon because normally when we do our webinars, you're just listening to us talk about our ideas and strategic processes. But today we actually have Jenny with us, who is going to be talking a little bit about how she and her company have implemented governance successfully. And so we're gonna cover that a little bit later on in this webinar, but it's going to be a really unique webinar for us today. So we do these webinars every Thursday. Some weeks we do two, one at 11 o'clock Central and one at 1 p.m. Central. And some days, some Thursdays, we only do it once. But every week you'll usually find us out here doing this. And you can find all of our webinar events and all of our other activities at our website. And we're going to post that in the chat right now. And also, we have a YouTube page that has all of our videos, including all of our past webinars that you can watch. And so we'll post that in the chat too. But today's webinar is going to be on the concepts of enterprise governance and how to manage enterprise governance utilizing Atlassian tools. So let's get started. All right. So this jumped ahead a little too far, but this next slide kind of gives you a snapshot of where we're going with this webinar. We kind of want to give you a little bit of a tease of kind of what you're going to see here at the end. And what this is going to include is a lot of the activities and tools that we have built out to solve for the successful implementation of our Atlassian governance. So we have activity tools, and we have visualization tools, and we have content and artifact tools and things like that. And we're going to be getting to that later on in the webinar. We're going to talk a little bit, first of all, about the strategy around governance. And then we're going to talk around the tools around governance. And then we're going to wrap up with Jenny actually giving us a case study on governance with a company. So let's go take it to the next slide. Okay, so governance, right? What do we mean by governance? This is always an interesting thing whenever we have this webinar, whenever I talk to people about governance, they ask, well, what do you mean by governance? Well, Wikipedia defines governance as the process of making and enforcing decisions within an organization or society. But we like to look at governance as a little bit differently. We like to look at governance as it's the idea of you have a company that is basically out there trying to produce value. And governance is the idea of how do we protect that company. So you might look around your organization for examples of governance as a comparison to what you might think of as governance or what we talk about today. For example, governance is needed for developing practices and procedures. And that might be governed by a LACE or a Lean Agile Center of Excellence, if you're familiar with a scaled Agile methodology. Another common area of governance is in the scope control as far as large customer programs, which is often managed by a CCB, a change control board, or some sort of change management or other joint managing body. Also, IT departments at large organizations typically have a very good governance on the tools and platforms themselves. A lot of those have maybe protection policies and things like that. And then your Atlassian tools, whether they're managed by IT or by engineering, also need governance so that you can organize and you can get the most value out of them. As you know, Atlassian, if you've ever worked in the Atlassian ecosystem, it has a propensity to land and expand. And most companies start off enjoying the simple but effective tools of Atlassian. And as that works well in their company and grows, suddenly they find themselves in a situation where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, or there's too many things that have been created, and it's expanded to the point where there's some challenges and problems going on. So we kind of like to think of governance as the balance between a rocket and its control tower. So the rocket in this example or analogy would be your company, what your company does to be successful, what your company does to serve its customers, to make money, basically, and to provide opportunities for its employees. And so your company has a lot of great ideas and a lot of creative chaos happening around it. And sometimes those great ideas and creative chaos need to be managed a little bit. And so that's kind of where the control tower comes into place. But governance is, good governance should be that control tower. And we'll get into this more as we go through the presentation. But we really want that control tower to be a strong representation of not only the processes and the tools that your company uses to be successful, but also the people as well. And that's a critical part of it. We want to avoid heavy-handed top-down governance. We want to avoid governance by absentia committee. What we really want to have happen is we want to have the people that are most knowledgeable about the tools being the ones that are helping and participating in the governing bodies and the governing policies. So let me talk a little bit about this framework. I kind of, in a cute little way, built out an acronym for the framework that represents the name Rocket. So first of all, we talk about representation. And so we want to make sure that we have the right representation of the people in the company that are utilizing the tools and being successful participants in how the company's value is being created. We want them as best as possible being represented in governance. Next is openness. Openness is an important thing because we really want to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. You'll notice as we go through this presentation, we're actually going to show you how to make sure you build tools so that not only are your governance ideas and policies defined, but if somebody wants to know something, it's easy for them to find it, even if they're not even in the Atlassian ecosystem or your Atlassian instance. And then third is coordination. Coordination is the ability of multiple people to work together effectively. And you really need strong processes and tools for that to happen. You really need a lot of visibility. You need a lot of participation and that kind of thing. And then the next one is knowledge. That's actually pretty important, especially from a governance standpoint. It can be very frustrating if the governing body does not actually have any knowledge of the tools to which it is governing. And so we want to make sure that both the policy and the tools and also the people involved in governance are such that the representation and understanding of the product itself is part of that governing body. And then also the expertise. And so the expertise is going to be the wisdom around using that knowledge. And so I often jokingly say the difference between expertise and knowledge is like when you make a fruit salad. So knowledge is knowing that tomatoes is a fruit, but wisdom or expertise is knowing that you don't want to put a tomato in a fruit salad. And so that's kind of what we look at when we look at our Rocket here. We want to make sure that the people that are knowledgeable in the tools are also people that have used it for a while. And then finally, teamwork. I love the fact that Atlassian stock ticker is TEAM or team, because they built their entire product around the idea that they want teams to be able to achieve more together. And so when we basically build our governance structure out, we want to make sure that we are representing the teams that need to be represented and that we're acting in a team type environment. So throughout this webinar, we are going to kind of step our way down. What I'm talking about right now is very high level, very conceptual, very theoretical, and it all sounds well and good. But how do I apply this to the actual tools and the day-to-day activity that we have going on around Atlassian tools, or maybe even other tools, and our needs for governance? So as we go through, we're going to start at this 10,000 foot level, and then we're going to make our way down to the ground level. We're actually going to show you how this applies to the tools. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner here, Bonnie.
Okay, well, I love that acronym, the Rocket, and what we're trying to accomplish. But when you want to send that rocket off into the moon, where do you start? Well, you need that vision. You got to have your vision to understand what is it we're trying to do. We have an example of a vision here: ensure an ongoing balance between enterprise goals and enterprise growth via flexible controls managed directly by the employees who best understand the purpose and value of the Atlassian products across the organization. And this is a great one, but you can use that one if you like, come borrow it. But either way, you have to have that vision and purpose statement written out so that you know you're going to be asked, why are you doing this? Why are you controlling us this way? And you want to be able to answer those questions. What were you going to say, Jenny?
Well, I think this was when I first went through this training and we started looking at forming our board. The, this really struck a key to us is that, especially that the governance body will support, um, and that there's balance. And this wasn't ever presented to us as a dictatorship. And I think that that really is in line with like the Atlassian vision, um, that we are one teamwork and transparency, and actually with the agile framework as well. So I would say that of all the things that we did, this is something that we spent a great deal of time wanting to strike, that our board was going to be one that was of teamwork and balance.
That's really important.
Yeah, and every company does things differently. And the Atlassian tools, they give you so much capability that where do you start? A lot of people can get into wild west situations very quickly. Um, and so those implementations across all the companies are very diverse. So really what your representatives, what your teams understand is what's most important to them, what problems they're trying to solve with those tools. And so that they need to be able to contribute to those decisions because there's going to be constraints. You need to understand the workflows and the terminology and understanding how that impacts the PPM level as well as the team level and what are the proper trade-offs. And there's also usability and performance issues and training and change management that all has to be considered. But the bottom line is your engineers, your team members, they don't want to worry about the tools. They want to worry about getting their job done. So you want to make the tools support that as best possible. And so the governance body's knowledge and experience needs to inform that, and they have to do that collaboratively. And so besides your vision and your purpose, you also have to name your board. We've seen boards named all kinds of things. I've seen change control board, change advisor board, steering committee, Jira advisory board. I have here the Atlassian rocket control tower based on our analogy.
Yeah,
Jenny,
ours is actually called the Jira Review Board, which is interesting because it concerns them more than just Jira. But we never went ahead and used Control Tower. We have actually in the procurement area something called a Spend Control Tower, and it almost like sounded like a video game. So we always came up with the Jira Review Board.
well, we can talk about ground zero and all kinds of management. So now let's move down from the 10,000 foot level of the business and importance down to the 5,000 foot level. And let's talk about what are the goals and the components of the governance body. And really, you need to understand what is the scope of responsibility that is being put on this governance body. And so we have these goals in the center that are kind of the center of everything. We have scalable growth, and that's what are the frameworks that we're trying to implement, and how is this going to allow us to continue to grow as we expand our tools and the footprint, whether it's portions of the organization or portions of the development process that are integrating into them. We should be making it more easier and more efficient every time we do repeated activities because we've already built that process that's scalable. And then we want visible control. And so controls are needed to keep the rocket from crashing, right? But they need to be visible. Everybody has to understand what they are and why they were selected and how to make improvements to those. So how visible are those control mechanisms in your organization? And does everybody know how they can request for help or request for changes or for new capabilities? Those questions, if you ask those of your own organization and they're coming up laughing, then that shows a place where you can improve your implementations. And then use your own. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, we've actually kind of drilled this down a little bit, not even just how you request, but what type of request, what they can expect. So we have working agreements based on the business unit, like what is considered a request that doesn't have to go to the board versus a request that does. So we can actually look into that deeper, and it allows us to say, well, if it doesn't have to go to the board and it's this, then you're looking at this kind of SLA. But if it does, then it kind of, this is what you can expect. It goes down a different path. So
Yeah.
it's really helped us strike a balance with the business unit and set expectations as well within them.
That's right.
Yeah, I could liken that to your tier levels of support. You've got your tier one support, which is the immediate, we just need to answer the questions, we just need to fix this problem. But then the tier level two support maybe requires more investigation. Tier level three support may be going to the governance board to make some decisions or purchases. So, yeah, that's a great example there. And then user ownership, it has to be representative. It has to be, of course, providing authority from the leadership, but also having the controls and the representation from the grassroots of the people who are actually using the tools on a day-to-day basis. And then knowledge sharing. How are we promoting the ideas across the company? How are we making sure that this new great capability that we've just deployed is actually being used appropriately, and that the right people have heard about it? So having that robust knowledge base and involvement with those communities of practice will be critical supporting this goal. So those are our primary goals for our governance board. But then we have all these components around centering around that. And it's based on what are the different products that we need to support. And it may look different at every organization depending on what items you have in here. But of course, you're going to have your Confluence, which is your knowledge bases and your team collaboration environment. As a knowledge base, Confluence can help avert or resolve issues from your end users even before you have to hear about it. But also Jira, your Jira system is going to be something that you have to manage for governance, not just for uh, the issue types and workflows, fields and screens, and all of the different schema sets, but the actual project architecture. What levels of scale are we supporting within Jira, and how do those have to interact with each other so that we can get the proper reporting that we need at all of the different levels? And so experienced Jira administrators need to be included in that governing body to help manage that and keep it scalable and efficient, and to be able to satisfy the different requirements that are going to come in from the users. Source control. You might have Bitbucket or Fisheye or other source control tools. So you're going to need governance for things like repo permissions and the practices that are being followed. Portfolio. Uh, Portfolio can be very diverse from every organization, all the way from advanced roadmaps to Jira Line, all of the built-in capabilities that you have within Jira, as well as all of the different marketplace apps for the different capabilities. So typically I work with teams, organizations, to try and define what are those real portfolio level requirements that are needed so that we can make a good roadmap to where they need to be. A lot of people come in thinking they know we want this particular tool, but when you start talking to them about what they really are trying to answer, we can often point them in a different direction and say, this might be a better fit and maybe be less cumbersome for you. So all of these are the items that are going to go into the products that you support.
I'll add one thing on there too with portfolio governance. One thing that's so important is, and because we're talking about governance, who are your executive sponsors behind your strategic portfolio management? Are they supportive of what you're trying to do from a tools and a process standpoint? If not, that's the first step that you have to do. Even in deciding what tools you're going to use for portfolio management, but then also the idea of what's standardized, what's not standardized. So that's a critical part of it. And oftentimes that can be facilitated better if you have the right executive sponsorship in your governing bodies as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Good add. The lower half of these are actually the activities that are going to be around your governance, such as your governance policies. What are the policies and procedures that they have to follow? And are there regulatory requirements that your governance needs to satisfy? record retention policies, or data control categorization. That's common in aviation or medical fields, especially, or finance. And then best practices. What are the industry best practices for the tools that we're managing? And are they captured somewhere for open visibility so that as people are onboarded to the governance board, do they understand what best practices we're trying to follow? Your internal governing bodies. There's more than just the Atlassian tools we're trying to manage in this organization. We also have our email systems, IT systems. We have quality assurance, certification maybe. What are the different governing bodies, and what are the constraints, and how do they overlap? So we need to make sure we're understanding those. Also, our governance framework tools. Which tools are we using in implementing our governance, and who's managing those? So hopefully you're going to eat your own dog food, or as Steve likes to say, drink your own champagne, however you like to express it. But that's a great way to make sure that you're not just dictating a policy without understanding what the impacts are. And then the how-to articles. And really, I would expand beyond just how-to articles, but all of the documentation that explains the decisions that we make and why we're doing things the way we are, how to use the tools appropriately for the processes that our organization follows. Maybe there's also instructor-led or computer-based training that needs to be provided for some of the capabilities. All of that goes into our how-to, essentially. So a good, healthy governance structure is going to need to include all of these components, all of these products that they're going to be supporting, as well as the practices that the governance board is going to be following. And so, sticking with the 5,000-foot level, let's talk about the pillars. And there are governance pillars, and I always bring us back to people, tools, and practices, or the people, practices, and tools. Those, everything comes down to those. That three-legged stool. If the stool is off balance, it's going to fall down. So you need to know who are the people in your governance, who are the representatives, what are their roles and responsibilities, and how much authority do they have over decision making? What is their delegation of approval? Then, of course, what are the tools? What are the tools that we're using for our governance, as well as what are the tools that we are governing? And so we'll be looking at the demo in a little bit about how we would set something like that up in Confluence for our knowledge bases. And we would use our Jira system for communication, reporting, and collaboration throughout. And then, of course, the governance practices. Uh, what are the recommended versus what are the required practices? What are the design decisions that we made for our Jira architecture and for our team level templates and workflows? Having all of those design decisions and the thinking that went behind them documented, that history of information is incredibly valuable, especially as roles change, people change, come and go. Why in the world did they do it that way? Well, if you have it documented, somebody's going to be able to find it, and that will help. And so those are things that you're going to want to include in your implementation. And I'll show you some of those examples when we get into the documentation.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about who you're listening to, right? So you are listening to Valiantis, and who is Valiantis? So perhaps you're listening to this because you're part of the Atlassian ecosystem. Perhaps you're listening to this because you're just interested in governance. But Atlassian, if you're familiar with it, is a very large tool-based ecosystem. There are about 250,000 companies around the world that use Atlassian tools. Many years ago, Atlassian made the wise decision of building their ecosystem around partners. And so there are hundreds of partners in the ecosystem, and that is who Valiantis is. We are one of the partners. But we are not just a partner. We are probably one of the largest partners in the Atlassian ecosystem. We are what's called a Platinum Solutions partner, and we are globally located. So we are helping customers with Atlassian solutions, both strategic and tactical, here in North America, but also around the globe as well. And we are helping them with all Atlassian tools and all Atlassian activities. Our earlier webinar this morning was actually on cloud migration because Atlassian is deprecating their server platform in February. So whether it's a platform or the products, we can help you with anything you want. Next slide. So we are also experts in everything we do. We are specialized in ITSM and ITIL practices. We are specialized in cloud migration. We are specialized in safe and agile practices. We have hundreds of, over 100 people in our organization that are fully certified. If you are working with a delivery or a consultant with Valiantis, they will be a fully certified consultant. We have offices around the world. But next slide. What's really important to us is we focus exclusively on customer success. So that is our number one measure of success, is customer success. And we measure that based on not only what do customers say about us, but how many times do customers come back to us, and how many times are we able to retain and grow the success with customers. We jokingly say with our customers that our job as a consultant in Atlassian is to obsolete ourselves, to teach you what you need to know so that we can step back and kind of push you out of the nest and help you be strong on your own. But we have many customers that will stay with us for years as they continue to grow and expand the Atlassian products in their ecosystems. And we have many customers that come back to us after many years. In fact, Jenny, who's with us today, met me at Atlassian's team meeting just a few months ago, and she wanted to talk about governance after having come to one of our first governance forums, which I think was about 3 or 4 years ago. So our goal is really about value, but really about customer success as well. So if you need anything, any help, both strategically or tactically or with licenses, please don't hesitate to reach out to Valiantis. We would be happy to help you and work with you. And that is all I'm going to say about that. Let's get back to the good stuff.
All right. So, well, we can go into the, let's see.
You skipped it.
I did.
No.
We seem to have lost it.
We lost a slide. That's okay. We can
Oh,
go
we
into
lost
the
a slide.
We'll go
Okay.
into the tools.
So yeah, well, let me hit escape here. And so let's go ahead right into it. So we'll start with Confluence. We have our Atlassian governance Confluence space defined here. This is just the home page. And of course, your Confluence itself is going to need some governance, how you structure your spaces and how you structure permissions within those spaces, your global and space templates, the guidance as to how to use those. But we've created this around our governance board. And so we have our governance structure here. And let's just look at some of what we've got here on our landing page. For example, we've got our governance triangle, which is going to define the team membership of our governance board. And so this is actually made up of 3 different groups. Our Atlassian steering committee, which is going to be often a smaller group. It's going to be your executive sponsors. You might have one of your key members from your administration teams, but they're going to be the ones that are typically paying the bills. They're the ones that are going to give the authority of those decisions that are being made. And they're probably going to represent the different divisions or organizations within your scaled company. So if you're in a smaller organization, maybe 500 to 1,000, you may only need one particular group, but this would be certainly for one of those organizations that's got 5, 10, 20, 30,000 employees on the system. You're going to have various portions to your governance. And so on the left-hand side here, we really have our administrative groups, and we have our product administration group on the left here, and your systems administration group on the right. And the difference here is that your system administration group might involve many different products. Like, for example, if we wanted to see that Zoom was being integrated with our Jira and Confluence so that we can have our conversations flow into Jira tickets. That might involve some security issues. It might involve your LDAP and your email communications. And so you're going to involve a broader community of administration experts in those conversations. But then your product admin group might be more functional towards how the software operates for Jira. What are the workflow decisions that are being requested? What are the fields that are being requested? It's going to be much more tight-knit of your administration and your end user representatives who are making those decisions. And so all of these people are going to be involved. And so we have this blue band down here, the product managers, project managers, your development managers, or your subject matter experts, your power users in the tools. They need to be participating in these governance boards because they're the end users. They're the ones that we're trying to make sure we understand what their requirements are, what their needs are, so that we can manage those tools and policies and practices holistically to satisfy what they need. So that would be an example of one of our governance documentation, and we have lots of governance articles within here. But then you might see the team membership listed here, as well as, let's just look at one of these. We might have a listing of the different team members that are involved. And if we have an open position, we might even have see some links to our Jira system where we have some nominations of the different new members that should be coming onto the board. So we'll talk about the Jira system in a moment. But of course, as you know, Confluence and Jira allow that collaboration so nicely with the integrated product. Down here, I've got a decision log underneath each of these, and this is just using some standard templates. But when you have all of the information about that the advisory board, or I keep saying the advisory board, the Acme Rocket Control Tower is what I named it. But that all of these decisions have been coming to them. We have our pages like underneath them as well, where we can see using the actual decision-making format, and I didn't actually fill this in very much, but you would have your relevant data and your background. What are the different options that we considered, and why did we make this decision? So all of these would feed into your decision log so that you have full transparency for people to see how their requests are progressing. And then down below, we would have a section on our policies and standards. For example, our policies and standards for all users. This is where they would be able to go and understand why we made the decisions we made around workflows, why the certain templates have been created for this type of team or that type of team with their issue types and workflows and fields. And we'd have a policies in progress section where people could track, again, various requests that are coming through and where they are at and how they're structured within the system with their parent issues.
One thing I always like to mention too is your knowledge base doesn't necessarily have to be limited to the people that are in the tool. Atlassian has a tendency to expand across your organization as a successful tool. And perhaps the first place that somebody might go to while they're thinking about getting involved in Atlassian, I would like my team to be part of Jira, or I would like my team to be part of Confluence, is the Confluence governance space. If it's publicly open to the entire company, then even people that are not in the Atlassian set right now or part of that governing process can come in here and can see your processes around that. And one of the things, like Bonnie was just showing, could be if I want to get into Jira, what's the policy for getting a new team into Jira? And you can use that as a situation to help people understand that and know what they need to do to set that up and get that process going before they're even in the tools themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw it done really well at one of my companies where we had a landing page that would essentially say, where do I get started? What is ALM? That's what we called it, the application lifecycle management. And it was like, what is ALM? And it had a whole information about each of the different products and why you would want to use them and who should be involved. So let's go ahead and look at Jira. So in our Acme Rocket Control Tower, I have the dashboard as the page here. So of course, it's just a standard dashboard based on our project, but you would have full visibility of the different types of work that are in work, and you might care about how many are being requested, and of course your activity stream where you can track what decisions or what activities are going on with that. But let's look at the project itself. And so designing this this governance boards project, it should be no different really than any other project within your team's organization, in that any organization is going to need to consider what are the different levels of scale that we're trying to capture within our Jira system. What is the scope of responsibility? It might be 2, 3, 4, 5 layers, depending on what kind of methodology you're following. And then what kind of constraints and information needs to flow up through these different layers of scale? What kind of information are we trying to track? Are we trying to track work, outcomes, timescales, the different aspects of work, and how are we going to track those? So here we, of course, have our standard Kanban board for what the Acme rocket control tower is working on. But let's look at what the actual project structure looks like. And so I'll go to the summary page. Maybe. And so we have our different team templates, and we want our team templates to be based on a certain set of issue types. And as much as possible, we want these issue types to be relevant to different types of teams. But the ones that the governance board might care the most about are knowledge, policies, and tools. And then we also included a nomination issue type as well, which might be valuable for an HR organization or for an awards organization. So we want to represent not just the engineering development, software development, but also the business practices and the governance practices, or the different types of teams that are going to be operating in Jira. And so you might have 6 to a dozen different team templates that they select from. And each of those issue types would, of course, have their workflows associated with it. You'll notice that I have the epic issue type in here as well, and you might name those features in your organization. But that's that second layer of scale of work. So all of the work that's being done in the organization as Jira is still flowing up to a program level or a product level, whatever you're calling that second layer of scale. And then it'll flow up even higher to perhaps initiatives at the portfolio scale. And so we want that work to flow up through the layers. We're just using some standard default screens, so nothing really particular defined there, but that could be very customized as well for those team templates. So that would be, and let's go ahead and look at one of these. So for example, a policy workflow. If you were to have your governance board have clear indications of, well, these are the best practices that we're trying to follow within our governance. In this particular system, we're trying to follow a governance where we have a single initial opening issue type or status, and then 2 ending statuses, closed and canceled. But the intermediate statuses for the different workflows that we're using might be different per issue type, so long as the information is flowing up. And we decided that we were going to follow single initial status and 2 ending statuses. I've seen an interesting Atlassian talk where a company was talking about they had 600 statuses in their system and they narrowed it down. I don't remember what they finally got down to, but he saw at least 60 different versions of closed, canceled, canceled with 1 L, canceled with 2 L's, done, complete, closed, finished, done, done, done. You know, they had 60 different versions. And so having that consistency across all of the teams will help with that management of that reporting as well.
Remember too, as you build out your tools, you want to balance between inviting participation in the governance as well as self-subscribed effort in the process. Maybe initially you want to make things easy for people to be able to elevate or float governance requests because it's a new process and you want people to be warmed up to it. But eventually you can lean heavily into the Atlassian tools to avoid things like meetings, avoid things that are decisions. You can use voting in the Jira tickets to help support decision making. You can use workflows and statuses and ownership within those statuses to decide who outside of the governing body is going to take an action to motivate that governance issue down the path. You don't maybe necessarily need to be, the governing body may not need to be the group that writes the documentation, say, around a new product. Maybe the person who wanted the product to begin with could be the one that owns the documentation around it. And so you can lean more and more into the tools as your governance structure evolves to help make it more efficient and easy for the governing bodies to basically be able to process what they need to while avoiding things like timely meetings and other distractions.
Yeah, great points. I just wanted to point out that we also then have our Kanban set up with a backlog so that we can see the different activities. Perhaps they have their business as usual activities, which would include our nominations. But all of their work can be managed within Jira as well, flowing into other Jira projects. Perhaps a business purchasing organization might be doing some of the purchasing of the licenses, or there might be some implementation that needs to be completed by some software development teams. And so those can point to their projects as well. But I think that's the extent of the demo. So let's go back to the slides and talk about the case study.
Yeah, so we have the privilege here of having Jenny with us, and I'll give you a little bit of fun history. So when Valientis started doing the idea of strategic and tactical governance management within the Atlassian tools, we started a forum. We wound up doing several forums around the United States, and Atlassian was actually at some of them, and Google was actually at one of them. All of those are available on our YouTube page under the governance playlist. So if you want to see some of those presentations that we had at those forums, you're welcome to check that out on the YouTube playlist. But one of our earlier attendees to that forum was Jenny, and she came back to us later and said, yeah, we've actually implemented some of the concepts. And so I said, that's fantastic. You've got to come to one of our webinars and tell folks about it. So Jenny, why don't you kind of tell us about the journey with Ajon and the governance activities there?
Well, when I met Steve the first time, we had just taken over administration of our Jira instance. We actually had at that time, there was 3 Jira instances that we were managing within the company. And to tell you the truth, when we walked through the doors of that governance, we could barely spell Jira, let alone administration of it. So we absolutely had no idea what we should do or how should we structure it. And so that one slide that was shown where the different roles and responsibilities of the board, that's really where we started. And we went with his recommendations of who was supposed to be it, who had the responsibilities, and formed a RACI for each of those. Now we are a global instance. Instead of having multiple instances, we actually consolidated to one instance. So we have approximately 10,000 users across the global instance. We represent 5 business units. Each of our business units has a Jira review board, and then we have one executive board that helps with deciding on purchasing of plugins, licensing, and things that would affect the unit as a whole. And we have had to come up with quite a few working agreements. Like if everyone must agree that a plugin must be purchased for us to go forward. And sometimes that can be challenging because everyone has different needs. But it does allow us to form together, and we also recognize that each of the business units have their own individual needs. So we put into place, that they can determine which items are business as usual and what has to go for their approval. And that helped quite a bit. It was interesting that you talk about the housekeeping and the number of statuses. When we merged all these instances together, let me tell you, I had the word done in several different languages. All with different contexts, all with different helps. And we are going through that, a lot of the cleanup of that, trying to consolidate and decide and rationalize what is going on. But we have found that having this model does help make decisions, and it also gets everyone on the same page. And it's a lot easier to explain to folks that, hey, this wasn't our business. This wasn't IT telling you can't do this. This was a collective decision with the business units, and this is why we made this decision. That's a lot easier of a conversation than, well, IT just won't let me do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great example. I remember my former career leading a governance board, and we had certain subject matter experts that were coming to consensus was very challenging. So we had voting bodies, but yeah, consensus, full consensus before you buy a plugin, that would be very challenging.
We talked earlier about governing bodies. Bonnie went through an example of the triangle. We actually have used that governing body structure with some of our customers to successfully implement governance. But there have been other customers of ours that have chosen not to use that structure. And so there's different governing body structures that you can have. Sometimes if you're small enough, you only need one governing group. Sometimes if you're very large, we've implemented a hub and spoke type governing body as well, where you give certain autonomy to independent divisions so they can make their own governing choices, and larger governing choices get brought back to the hub. But Jenny, tell us a little bit about your governing bodies and how you guys were able to implement that.
Well, what we did is that this was back in the early days. So back in the early days, we had a governing body with the team that supports our infrastructure and does our upgrades, because we're on the data center version. At that time, we were on the server version. So as we were deciding to upgrade our tools and considering if we needed a bigger EC2 instance or whatever, we worked with them around the cost, and we had that one governing body where we interacted with on a weekly. It also helped that we built that relationship. So when an incident came in and we were like, well, no, it's the platform, no, it's the infrastructure, we worked quite a bit better together, that we had that governance in place. And then also we formed, as I said, different Jira review boards with the business units. And the representation from those business units were folks that were in change management, or they were in the architecture, or they were in the development teams. And they helped really, as people were requesting items. I want a new workflow. Um, uh, I want to go ahead and add this custom field. We were able to work with them and partner with them to try to decide what was best, not only for their business unit, but also for their strategic direction. Because sometimes you don't want, every team using a different workflow. You do want to have a standard workflow within groups. And so they were able to help us determine that and work for their best benefit. And then we, of course, have the executive Jira review board that goes more into the spending and the cost. And that we only meet, at first we were meeting once a quarter, and now it's more ad hoc. We at least do it on an annual basis, and it kind of swarms around budget period when we're looking at renewals. But if a new plugin request comes in, we might also meet at that point in time if there's a cost, or if we need to discuss what the strategic direction is going to be.
I love what you said there about the balance between the customization and the standardization, because it really does require some systems thinking, where you're optimizing for the whole, not for each of the individual parts, but
Mm-hmm.
not sacrificing the parts at the same time.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, as you were talking too, we mentioned this earlier. The balance of your governance structure and framework really should be such that you can avoid meetings over time and things like that. And so there's even a whole concept around the governance of meetings, right? So which of us does not struggle with our calendar and all kinds of challenges around meetings and recurring meetings and things like that. So that can be helpful as well. And so we want to build that out. But I do like how you emphasized again, too, the idea of it has to be a balance. You have to have executive sponsorship. You're going to be dealing with purchases. You're going to be dealing with hard decisions, especially in the Atlassian ecosystem over the last 2 years. There's been a huge decision point for many companies of whether or not they're going to move to cloud or not. And
Mm-hmm.
they're not moving to cloud, and they're on server, they have to at least move to data center. And so you're talking about a major platform migration. And so if you have a governance body and process in place, that makes that so much better to do. But you do have to have the ground level representation, because those are the people that really need the help, and those are the people we want to make sure that the governance process is not too onerous for. And then finally, Bonnie was showing you the Confluence page. One of the things that we've done with customers is when they have needed to implement governance, we've used that Confluence space itself, not only to describe all the artifacts around our governance structure, but also to map out the roadmap for the governance journey itself. And so there's actually a roadmap in Confluence for the active movement into a governance structure that's happening real time with the company as they're building that out. So all really great stuff. Okay, so we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left in the webinar. So we do want to take just a minute to see if we have any questions. And while we're asking questions, go ahead and put that last slide up there. I'm just going to say we have, like I mentioned earlier, we do a ton of what I like to call publishing. We have hundreds of YouTube videos out there. We do webinars once a week, sometimes twice a week. Bonnie and my QR codes there on the page. If you want to reach out to us, our email addresses are there. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. We will help you or redirect you to somebody who can help you. Also, we've got an events calendar on our website, and we're going to post that in the chat here in just a minute as well. Check out the events we have. You will want to pay attention to some of the marketing events that we do. Our marketing events are truly unique. We have two goals when we do a marketing event. One goal is to provide you with at least one piece of value that you would normally have to pay a consultant to get. And the second thing we do is we try to provide you with food, right? So the marketing event that we did today, which was on cloud migration, everybody that attended got a pizza. We've done fun things like Jira Line and Wine, where we've shipped out wine and cheese to people. So if you check out our website, there's a lot of great events coming up. We actually have an OKR event coming up here in the near future as well. But let me just take a few minutes to see if there's actually any questions that anybody has. So one of the questions is, if we wanted to implement governance, how would we start with that? You know, where's a good starting point? And we get this question a lot. So this concept of governance actually came from when we still do classes, but I used to be a teacher in the class. And as I would talk about the places and the tools and things like that, people would say, how can you manage this? And so the starting point really depends on where you are. In my class, I would often have administrative people, and they were interested in governance because they were frustrated with the growth and expansion that was happening. And so we can help bring things to light with an administrative person, but we really can't implement a governing structure with just an administrative person. So if that's where you are, one of the things you need to do is start to put together the visualization around why you need governance and why you need executive support with that. And we can help you with that. If you have that kind of momentum already going, we have helped companies stand up a governance platform. Everything that we've talked about here, we've done that within basically a week of effort, where we meet with people on Teams, we collect information from them, then we sit down for 2 or 3 days with the admin and we build out the framework. Then we wrap up the week by meeting with the teams again and demoing the framework. And then we follow up with support after that as they implement that. We've done that several times with companies. And it's a very, very efficient minimum viable product to stand you up and get you going with your governance. But wherever you are in your journey, that's what we're here for. Just reach out to us and let us know, and we'll help you out. Any other questions? So here's one that maybe we'll wrap up with this one. As you have rolled out different governance programs and activities, what were the most common challenges you've seen with standing up governance? So let me start with this, and then I'll ask Bonnie and Jenny if they have experience as well. We rolled out a governing body with a local utility company, and they were moving into Jira, and they knew early on, before they even stood up their Jira platform, they knew they wanted a governing body, which was very smart of them, and we were really happy to hear that. But one of the challenges we ran into was, because Jira was new, Confluence was new, the challenge they had was who should be in the governing bodies, and how do we get people to even know what's going on? So typically when we stand up a governing process in the tools, we want it to be motivated by people. We want it to be a situation where the governing body is not having to meet all the time. And so as we looked at that with this company, we realized that we set some of the hurdles up a little too high for the organization, because the people, the users, didn't really know Jira very well. And so we had to make a shift initially so that users that needed governance help could have a more simplified process for submitting tickets. And so we opened up the opportunity for them to just submit a ticket, any kind of ticket they needed to. And then if there was more detail needed, we would then go back to them and ask for more detail. That meant that in the beginning, the governing bodies had to meet a little bit more. And I remember I was part of some of those initial meetings, and we would go through and we'd literally say like 20 or 30% of these tickets just don't even have enough information on. We're going to send it back and ask them for more information. But it really did get us past that initial hurdle of getting the participation, which is critical in a governing process, because it will not survive, again, without executive sponsorship, but also without that ground level participation. So that was one of the challenges that I've seen. Bonnie?
I think the things that I see the most frequently are one that Jenny alluded to, is gaining traction. Where do we start, especially when it's a technology that may be new to you? I know I was thrown over the wall from engineering to the shared services org to manage ALM, and I was like, Jira, Confluence, what in the world are these things? And I knew how to spell agile. But gaining that traction, getting the training, getting the learning under your belt, that's often one of the biggest challenges. And then the other one is getting the authority, because you have to have the authority to make those systems thinking decisions. What is the right balance? And so you want to have that that authority that's with that executive level sponsorship. So those are the two biggest challenges I've seen. Yeah. What about you, Jenny?
In the early days when we started all of this, I think our biggest challenge was because we are in a very highly regulated financial industry, that a lot of our systems that the developers may use are not customizable. This is the process, thou shalt follow the process, you can't deviate. And here I'm giving you a tool where I'm asking you to help me define the process. I'm helping you, I'm saying, I want this to make the work easier for you. So tell me what you need. And it was interesting because when we first started, it was like deer in the headlights. They're like, well, I don't know. What do you think that we should do? And so, well, what is every other company doing? Well, every other company is different. And I would show a picture of like the agile landscape and say, well, this is safe is kind of over here. You could do rapid release planning. You could do Kanban. You could do Scrum. And it was just a very deer in the headlights. Like I had just given them the world. And now, that we've kind of gone through, it's like knowing who we're asking and are we asking the right questions, and being very, being very cautious not to overwhelm, and really focusing on what is the MVP of what this team is trying to achieve. Let's break this down, and we're going to start here, and it's okay to ask to make this better.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's been our biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So it's interesting getting different perspectives from different people on that. But anyway, we are basically out of time. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening to this. We really do hope this has been helpful. I want to especially express my appreciation to Jenny for joining us and bringing her practical real world experience. Those of us that are consultants and teachers, sometimes we can basically say whatever we want to, but it's the rocket's going to go, and so the people in the real world have to figure out how the rocket and the control tower work together. So thanks so much, Jenny, for being part of this. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody else for joining. Yeah, our pleasure. Thanks everyone else for joining us. And again, let us know if you need anything from us, and we will have other webinars and marketing events that you'll be seeing on our website coming soon. So everyone have a great adventure in the Atlassian ecosystem.